Cool, kia ora, and thank you for joining us. So this topic came out of a conversation I had with a former colleague called Jean Baker, who's no longer with us. So we were talking about how organisations handle decisions in progress, and different ways of dealing with them. And I realised that in all the Agile conferences that I've been to over many, many years, I hadn't actually been to a talk about effective decision making. And yet, good work and good deliverables are underpinned by good decisions. So my name's Suzanne Nottage. I work for CA Technologies as an Agile transformation consultant. I'm lucky enough in the past year to have worked in Australia, Thailand, Singapore, the States, and New Zealand. So I do get to go into a lot of organisations, both private sector, public sector, government, and I even have a little non-profit pro bono client on the side as well. So we're going to look at a few things today when my slides pop up on screen. This is a two-way conversation. So I've been involved in Agile for about 8 years. I love coming back to present, and I've done this session about 6 times this year. But my sessions are quite interactive. So before we get on, I'd like to know a bit about yourselves as well. So there may be 4 types of people in this room. The first sort are explorers. So you've come to Agile New Zealand, sailing off into uncharted waters to grab as much treasure as possible to take back to your organisations. Top left, we've got shoppers. So shoppers are here at Agile New Zealand. They may put 1 or 2 things in their trolley as they go down the aisles at each session and take those back and leave some things on the shelves. Down the bottom in the left quadrant, we've got vacationers. So they've gone choice, 2 days off work, and it's catered. Okay? And on the right, we've got prisoners. So you've been voluntold to be here. Maybe your boss is awkwardly sitting next to you. And you can't wait to get back to work to do all that important stuff rather than this Agile stuff. So let's see who's in the room. How many explorers do we have? Oh, fantastic. Okay. How many shoppers? Oh, good. Okay, cool. Any vacationers? Any prisoners? No? Okay, sometimes we do. Sometimes my colleague Jenny puts her hand up for that. So she's helping me today if you see her data out. Oh, well, we may have a 5th type of person in the room who's just realised they're in completely the wrong place. No? Okay, cool. Right, so there's 3 things we're going to talk about in this session. So firstly, what's the problem? What's the problem with decision making? Because there are a few problems. Secondly, how does Agile and Lean help us make better decisions, and how does that influence innovation? And thirdly, how do we get our teams, so the most important thing in our organisations, our people, how do we help them make better decisions? Feel free to take photos at any stage, and the slides will be available to you afterwards as well. Okay, so when I was talking to Jean, we were talking about the quantity of decisions in our organisations. So organisations in some ways are just big decision-making factories. Now, New Zealand has a population of over 4 million people, and there's roughly 2 million of us at work on any given day. So think about how many decisions are floating around organisations. If we only make 10 decisions each per day, 2 million of us at work, that's 20 million decisions floating around, multiplied by the number of days we have in the workplace. So that's a lot. But how many of us here have actually had any training on decision making? Yeah, usually 1 or maybe 2 hands go up, that's all, yeah. Like communication and conflict management, it's something we do all the time, and yet we're just expected to know how to do it. And we often don't do it very well. If I asked you to describe how you make decisions, sometimes you could tell me, but sometimes we just have no idea. So let's look at that a little bit further. There's some problems inherent in our decision making. So has anyone heard of the term thin slicing before in terms of decision making? Yeah, a few people. It's a little bit like first impressions. So we all know in terms of a job interview, the person interviewing us makes a very quick first impression. So it's all about that first 30 seconds. So thin slicing is great in some situations. So if you're in an emergency, or if there's a sporting situation where you need to make a snap judgment, so think back to not how we work in the modern world, but think back to the olden days, thin slicing is great because we need to make decisions very quickly. But often we make it on a very small piece of information. Often it's influenced by things like our own likes and dislikes, stereotypes, our prejudices, and unconscious biases, and those influence our decisions maybe more than they should have. It's a subconscious thing rather than a conscious thing. Now, I've lived out of New Zealand for about the last 10 years, and I get stereotyped quite a lot because I'm usually the only Kiwi in the room. So people tend to think one of 3 things. I like rugby, I'm good at putting up a tent, And I'll probably fit into the team quite well and just muck on, roll my sleeves on, and get on with anything. So I'm quite often very quickly stereotyped as soon as people hear that I'm a Kiwi, and we do it all the time. But the problem is it's not always a good way to make decisions. Now, this is fine maybe for the average person, but what about all of us? I mean, we're highly trained professionals. We're experienced, we're skilled, and some of us know about these things. So are these sorts of problems with our decision making going to affect people in this room or not? Let's have a little activity to find out. So on the screen here, we've got the 8 biggest cities in Auckland, plus one interloper. So I've thrown London in the mix as well. And they're in some rain clouds. So just pretend we're not in a decision-making session at the moment. Just pretend we're having a chat. Okay, and we're talking about the weather in these destinations. So if we had to line up these destinations from wettest to driest, where would we put London? So I know most people here probably haven't been to London, but we all know a bit about these cities here. So let's pick on London. Where would we put London? So how many people think London is one of the wettest cities here? It's got one of the highest amounts of rainfall. Okay, so maybe a quarter. Who thinks it's somewhere in the middle, just based on, whatever it is? Okay, somewhere in the middle here. Okay. Anyone think it's towards the drier end? Okay, a few hands, maybe 5%. Anyone think it's the driest? Millimetres per year. Yeah, according to Google. Cool. So, and did anyone think it was the driest, just by any chance? Okay. Any particular reason you three think it's the driest?
I don't think it actually rains heavily.
Oh, so you're... And that's really interesting. Okay, so I wasn't looking to go and make a particular extreme point with this example, and usually I substitute these cities for Australian cities when I deliver it there, but it comes out the same. So of all those cities up there, London is actually the one with the least rainfall per year. Okay, but it is the cloudiest. Whenever we see London on the movies or in books or talked about in terms of weather context, it's always about the cloud and the rain. And in fact, it's cloudy almost all the time, but the clouds tend to pass over. Okay. So what about this heart here? So heart disease, very common disease. I think 1 in 3 of us end up affected by cardiovascular disease. So when we think of heart disease and heart attacks, do we think of men or women? Is it a men's disease or a women's disease? So how many people think of it as something affecting men more than women? Yeah, how many people think it's more women rather than men? Jenny, you've been to my talk before, so thank you for remembering that. Really? Yeah, actually, and I have looked this up for 2 countries. Heart attacks kill women more than men, okay? One of the reasons for that is women are more likely to die in a heart attack, so men get a second chance to have another one. Okay, and women tend to have them about 10 years later, and by that stage we've got diabetes or other complications. Okay, but we tend to think that it's a men's disease. Okay, and finally, let's bring this a little bit back to the real world. Estimating, something dear to our own hearts. This is the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now we all know that estimating things we haven't done before is challenging, but when we're estimating something like building an iconic building like this, we're not just asking Joe Public. We're getting people who are at the top of their game to estimate. So these are building professionals, architectural professionals, etc. So the Sydney Opera House was supposed to cost $7 million to build. Anyone got any idea what it ended up at? What do you think it might have cost in the end? Yeah, okay, so a very good guess down the front. $102 million. It went from $7 million to $102 million. So next time your project goes over budget, just say to your boss, at least I'm not this bad. It was also supposed to deliver in 1963, but it ended up opening in 1973. It was 10 years late, okay? Yeah. So anytime we do something new and are trying to make decisions about things we haven't done before, we've got all sorts of confirmation biases about how well it's going to go. It won't go badly this time, things won't go wrong, etc., etc. And often we are out and way out. So let's admit that we have biases and emotions around our decisions. Let's admit that we have a problem. And in terms of decisions, again, like other things, when they're invisible, they're hard to deal with. So is there a way that we can start to visualize our decisions? Is there a way we can start to think of them, decisions in progress, A bit like work in progress. Are there some commonalities? Now, allow me a little bit of poetic license over the next few slides with a metaphor. We're going to treat decisions in progress a little bit like work in progress because they have a lot of things in common, and we start looking at the anti-patterns and the success patterns and apply them to decisions in progress, we can get some better outcomes, and that helps us with our innovation, as we'll see later. So here's our metaphor. Who drove to work on a road like this? Yeah, okay, so you can see how far back on the internet I had to go to get a picture of one car on the motorway. So if this is our decision, this is our decision or our work, when we've only got one in progress, it's going to flow through the system fine, okay? It's going to get to where it needs to go on time, all those sorts of things. So the problem is in organizations, we don't just have one decision on the go at a time. We have decisions all over the place, and that starts to cause problems. Who drove to work on a road more like this? Okay, I did deliver this earlier this year to a guy from India, and he said, that was my road. I drove to work on a road just like that in the morning. So this is a little bit more like our organizations in terms of the number of decisions. So we're talking about quantity of decisions here. So when we start to spread our people across lots of different projects, when we have silos, when we have all different sorts of workflows, when we don't have clear signals, this sort of things happens. So in this example, we don't have clear signals. We've got a bottleneck right in the middle that everyone wants to go through. And we also have lots of different types of work or decisions or whatever you want to call it, trying to occupy the same space at the same time. And which is going to go through quicker, our smaller ones or our bigger ones? Yeah, smaller, okay? So Agile is all about small batches. So if we were trying to get through this situation quickly, we'd want to be on one of the smaller vehicles, one of the larger vehicles. So one of our first anti-patterns is we try and keep pushing decisions and work into the system rather than pulling them through. And the effect on the system is that we have delays, and we have compounding delays. So one decision delay has a knock-on effect to other decisions, et cetera, and it just goes on and on. So once a project starts to run late, it's really hard to get that project back on track, particularly in a traditional waterfall environment. What about our people? How do our people feel in this situation? So they're our most valuable asset in the organization. Okay, it's pretty frustrating when we're working in an environment like this. So let's look at another anti-pattern. This is one of my pet peeves, so unplanned work. Hey, can you just do this? I've just got a quick question. Can you add this into your week? Can I add this meeting here? Okay, I counted up in 1 week last month, I had an extra 8 hours of work thrown in just that week. So that's an extra day's worth of work with people trying to grab more time. So we really kill our flow and eat the capacity of our system when we throw unplanned work in, but it's often invisible. We often don't have ways of visualizing it and handling it effectively. And unplanned work consumes a lot more decisions because it's less well understood and it often takes longer. So let's have a real-world example that affected one team. So this is a team I worked with a couple of years ago. They were called the Sumo team. They'd been together a long time. They were using a Kanban board for their planned work. And the problem was that their planned work wasn't really getting done. They were doing Kanban as well as they could. They didn't have a coach, but they'd been doing it as well as they could. And things on the board just weren't working. And we had a retrospective. And we found out that the team was all secretly taking on work for their mates, okay? So mates in other teams. Can you just do this? Can you just add this in here, etc. And so after that amnesty, for the next 4 weeks, we said, look, just keep taking it on, that's fine, but start visualizing it. This is a tool called LeanKit, and I'm not getting paid to say that, it's a good tool. But this tool here, they started visualizing all their work. So the yellow stories are the planned work, the pink stories are the unplanned work. Okay, they hated pink, so I made them use pink to visualize the things they didn't like. And we can see there that almost half their capacity was taken up with unplanned work. And that meant they were downing tools on the planned work, going to talk to people outside of teams, having to make lots of decisions, which ate up their cognitive effort, caused interruptions, etc. And you can see the effect on the system there. And it varied a lot per sprint. So one sprint there might not be much, one sprint there was a lot. So we came up with some effective ways to make decisions about whether to take on that unplanned work. So is it really urgent or can it wait till the next sprint? and what's the least I can give you right now to keep you happy, and I'll come back and do the rest later. So we taught them that it was okay to say no, or they had to get permission from their friend in the same team to take it on. So if you could justify it to your colleague, then it was fine. But you couldn't just take it in as you went. So we reduced their unplanned work and the number of decisions around that by about 25%, and all of a sudden the planned items on the board started to flow through the system. So first anti-pattern, start to reduce our unplanned work, and that will cut down on the number of decisions that we need to make. Okay, second anti-pattern. So most of us in this room know about batch size. So Agile is all about small batches. So small batches of time, small batches of people, and small batches of work. And this is a big batch here. So in traditional projects and in traditional organizations, we tend to batch things up, and that includes decisions. So we often have monthly project board reviews, and we may have annual planning cycles and annual budgeting cycles. So that leads to long lead times, it can lead to delays, long feedback loops, all those sorts of things. So not just with our work, but also with our decisions. If we want to make more effective decisions, let's break things down into smaller batches. I try and customize my slides wherever I go, and I went looking on Air New Zealand's website for a really big plane. It turns out Air New Zealand doesn't have any really big planes. So they've got lots of small planes because they've got that additional flexibility as well. So once we've got our small batches, we can make decisions much more frequently. And we've heard from some keynotes already over the last 2 days about some of the benefits of working in those much smaller cycles and getting feedback loops, not just with work, but with decisions as well. So if we start taking those anti-patterns and changing them into success patterns, what we get is a road more like this. So we have a steady flow of decisions, and that's helpful for the organization. It gives us increased stability, increased predictability, and it's one of those things that really helps build trust with the business, and we can do it relatively quickly. So just as an example, in our own company, we've got about, I think, 6 or 8 software teams that develop our own product, and they run at about 90% predictability. And because those features that we're delivering are prioritized, we know quite early on in a quarter which ones we're definitely going to guarantee delivery of and which ones may slip into the next quarter as well. So having that 90% predictability is really achievable. Let's take it to the real world and have a look at it at scale. So last year I worked in a US company, a large insurance company that was preparing to launch a new product as part of the Obamacare healthcare. This was a big deal. So we had 500 people working together in 7 Agile release trains, so 7 teams of teams. And this is what their work looked like. So this is showing the flow of work and decisions through that part of the organization over a 12-week period. So this is called a cumulative flow diagram. If you haven't seen one before, the key word is flow. It's showing work flowing through the system. So the greenish color down the bottom is all our done work. The yellow in the middle is our work in progress and our decisions in progress. And the pinkish color is our total backlog, so how much we want to get done. And you can kind of see there, that's a nice healthy one. If you haven't seen it before, it looks fairly healthy. We're getting stuff done. Our yellow band is nice and thin the whole way up. So our decisions about what's done are flowing through the system. Okay, that's nice. Let's look at another part of the organization. So same organization, same time period, but these guys were not using Agile practices to help make their decisions. Okay, tale of 2 cities. So it's very quickly, you can see here, even if you haven't seen a cumulative flow diagram before, the one on the right just doesn't look healthy. So down the bottom, you can see the green. Things are taking much longer to get done. That was kind of okay in their context because it was a different context. But look at that work in progress. Look at all those decisions there that haven't been made, all that stuff that still needs to be talked about. And what have we got here? So we've got 3/4 of the way through the release. We've got that awkward conversation that you have to have when lots of decisions have to be made all at once. We know we're not going to deliver everything, so what do we have to throw out? You think of all the people who have to down tools and have those impromptu meetings to start to decide what are we not going to do. So same organization, same time period, but 2 very different results because of Agile and not Agile. Okay, so that's in an IT organization. We can see about how Agile can help with the quantity of decisions going through. But what about the quality of decisions? So we've talked about before, when we've got trained and qualified and experienced people, surely we're making logical decisions. Well, I don't have any IT stats, but I don't know if anyone saw this in The Economist. I think it was last year. So The Economist printed a study that followed a group of Israeli judges for 10 months. So it was a long study, 10 months they were followed every day, to look at the effect of their judgments. So were they made on a logical basis, or was there some emotional element to it as well? And it was really interesting. So this is parole applications. So if you're coming up to have your parole application heard, this is basically saying whether your application was successful or not. And what they looked at was where your case was heard in the day. So were you the first case early in the morning, or were you the last case late at night? And did you have the same probability of your parole application being successful? And the results were so stark that they actually made changes to the system. So what this is showing is if you had your parole application heard by a judge at the beginning of the day, you had a 60 to 70% chance of your application being successful. Great. Okay. The problem is there's 2 meal breaks during the day plus the end of the day. If you were the last person to have your application heard for parole before a meal break, what are your chances of it being heard successfully? 0. Okay? A maximum, that's roughly about 10%. Okay, and this is over a 10-month period. This is not just 1 month. Okay, so when our judges, it turns out, and this is backed up by other research as well, when we are tired, when we are frustrated, when we are feeling overworked, we make poorer decisions. The judges were quicker to say no than they were to say yes as well. They took more minutes to say yes than to say no. The no's were quite quick. So think to your own teams and your own ceremonies around approving projects or making big decisions. So when did they happen? Next time you want to get your $1 million business case signed off, maybe you should send some cookies and coffee to the execs to have it before you get your decision approved as well. So in terms of looking at the problem, there's some takeaway actions there. So let's start in our own organisations looking at the cycle time for decisions. If you've looked at Mary and Tom Poppendiek, so lean experts, they identify delay as one of the main wastes in service organisations like ourselves. And start looking at lead time. We don't need special software for this. That's something we can just do with paper and pen. So how long is it taking for our decisions to get through? What about our next problem? We've got too many decisions. When I go into organisations, the number one word they use for how they are is busy. Okay, we're busy doing stuff. They can't tell me what they're going to finish next, but they can tell me that they're working on 7 things at once. So too many decisions, a high amount of decisions in progress or DIP, stresses our system. Now in construction and roading, stress on a system is a bit more visible. In organisations, our systems can be just as broken. However, it's not just the systems that break, it's also the people. So what happens when our system is overloaded? Well, in the keynote speech just before, our release manager, he ended up leaving. So he was sick of being overloaded on his Friday nights. So people go with too many decisions in progress. When things slow down, people start going around the system. Or we have to go externally because our IT guys can't deliver it quick enough. Okay? So we put pressure on our systems and we put pressure on our people when we have too many decisions in progress. So what we need is an economically driven and simple way of prioritising our decisions and the things that we work on. And this is a simplified version of a scaled Agile framework. I'm not aligning it to one in particular. What I've just put it up here, don't worry about the details too much, but what we're really showing is decisions flowing through the system. So at the top left in our thought bubble, we've got our ideas, so things coming into the system. And we've got a portfolio Kanban board there. So instead of just trying to push everything through, we've got work in progress limits to limit how much we push through and work on. So we're very focused there, deciding on just enough to come through, and we're going to talk about how we do that in a minute. So that comes through to our next layer, so the program level. So we're going from strategy down to execution, connecting that. And in our program level here, we've got value streams. So we've got long-lived teams aligned to value streams. So we're continuously feeding them work. We're not deciding so much about projects, which projects to take in. We're just continuously feeding them work. And down at the bottom level, we've got our Scrum. So we've got our 2-week cycles and teams working at iterations, which most people are familiar here. So let's look at how we can start to flow decisions and prioritize our work through the top 2 layers. Okay. What we're also going to use is I'm going to use a metaphor. This is just really handy. I don't know where it came from, but it was one that I found a few years ago, this acronym. So if you're ever trying to improve something, it's just a useful acronym to remember in terms of, first of all, start to simplify and eliminate stuff, make it simple, standardize it before you automate it or send it offshore, etc. So it's just really handy. So we're going to look at how Agile and Lean help us with this. How many people here have a team level, some sort of team level board like this? Oh, fantastic. So that's like 3/4. How many organizations here have a higher level one? So one at program or portfolio? 1, 2. Okay, so maybe 20%. I start to see this more and more, and this really helps our execs make decisions about what we work on and stop pushing too much through the organization. Now, when I worked with this company, so this is actually my pro bono client, they had no idea how much they were working on. They had no decision-making framework for taking in work. They just started whatever came in. We worked out they had 53 initiatives on the go at once, and they're a very small organization, so that's a lot. And we reduced their, a third of their work was stuck in the delay column. And through putting in some effective decision-making tools, we've reduced their delayed items by 90%, and we've reduced their work in progress by 75%, because the teams are better at making decisions about what they take in. Okay, secondly, let's try and simplify our decisions, not just at team level, but across the organization. So a lot of companies these days are going from what I call Swiss cheese agile, where we've just got pockets of Scrum teams, to joining things up. So again, this was at the large American insurance company I worked at, so we had 500 people. This was their definition of done. So we've got a definition of done at story level, at feature level, and at release level. So the teams are engaging in this. The teams are updating it every 12 weeks, every quarter. They have an opportunity to say, let's keep it or let's change it. This cuts down on a lot of decisions because we just go to what's here. Everyone's on the same page. Work just starts flowing through the system a lot more. And let's start eliminating our decisions, so there's wherever possible. So there's 3 types of decisions that we may be making. Some of them are adding value. Maybe some of them used to add value, but they don't really anymore because we've moved on. And then there's the ones that we have to do, so maybe around compliance, etc. So what's the quickest ways that we can get those through? Do we really need to get legal involved if the decision is on something under 20K, for example? So start to question what's the simplest way that our decisions can flow through, because we want to focus our cognitive effort on the value-add decisions, not the non-value-add decisions. The other way we can look at it, this is also useful if you're doing any process or lean activity as well, is what type of decisions are they? So runners are things we deal with every day, so things that should just fly through the system, okay? Like at story level. Our rarities are where we want our smart people or our bottlenecks to really focus on. So we want to give them as little work as possible. Who's read the Phoenix Project here? Yeah, remember Brett the bottleneck? So he's the one guy that everyone in the organization has to go through to get things done. So we want to limit the amount of stuff that he has to do by training up people or reducing the scope of stuff he's working on. And repeaters tend to fall in the middle. So let's try and get our runners throwing through the system as much as possible. And we'll talk about that a bit later as well. And the reason we want to do that is because wherever possible, we want to reduce our cost of delay. So get what we're working on out to customers as quickly as possible. Because while it's in our IT shop rather than out with the customers, it's degrading in value, and it's one day more that our competitors have got the jump on us. So if we can start moving our hump to the left, we're getting our product out to market much quicker, we're earning our benefits much quicker, and we're reducing the cost of delay. So Don Reinertson, the lean expert, who I'm sure most people have heard of here, he says if there's one thing in your organization you can do, what you can measure, it's measure the cost of delay. Cool. So very quickly, another little problem that we have, we talked a bit about cognitive bias. There's 4 little other things that affect us as well. So type 1 versus type 2 thinking. Type 1 is our very quick snap decision. Okay, it's very quick for us to make decisions. Type 2 is the stuff we do more in our jobs sometimes, so it's much more cognitively expensive. And we tend to have a little programming errors in our brains. So one is around optimum bias. Has anyone ever been on a project that's been late or over budget before? Okay, and what happens next time? Next time we're going to get it right. Next time that won't happen. Okay, no matter how many teams and organizations I work with where we launch release trains, I say, you have taken too much into this program increment. You are trying to deliver too much next quarter. And they all say, no, we'll be fine. And they all come back to me at the end and say, we took in too much. We didn't get through as much as we expected. Secondly, loss aversion. Every organization I've gone into, except for one, has said to me, we're a really risk-averse organization. Okay? As humans, it tends to, lots of researchers pan this out, as humans we're programmed to try and reduce our losses rather than go after the big gains. The only company that was an exception to the rule was a sports betting company. Okay, so it doesn't surprise me that they were the one who didn't have loss aversion as much as the others. Sunk costs. Has anyone been on a project where we've spent so much we just have to keep going? Yeah, okay, so it's a human trait. It's a human trait. And finally, sorry, you can't see that. Shows up on my computer, anchoring effect. So this is where we get hung up on one particular piece of information and we make all our decisions about that one piece of information. Okay? It tends to often happen about one of the first things we've heard as well. So we need a way of prioritizing our work and making decisions that overcome some of these biases. I'm assuming everyone here knows what a story point is, so I don't need to go through this. Fantastic. So story points are used for stories, but we can also relatively estimate other things. If you don't get a chance to take a photo or write this down, if you just Google WizGIF Agile, it'll come up as well. Really useful. I had someone email me last time I presented this in Auckland, and she went away and did it and came back and said it worked. So as tried here. So what we're saying here is we've always got a big backlog of work. Let's not decide on everything. So when I was in the States this year, the company I was working with, large credit scoring company, they've got 1,500 initiatives in their backlog. I said, how long will that take you to do? And they said, about 6 years. Like, do you seriously prioritize 50? It was in an Excel spreadsheet, 1,500 initiatives. Let's focus on prioritizing the significant few rather than the trivial many. So how do we do that? It's really hard to estimate things like business value in dollars and cents, but we can estimate it with story points relative to the other initiatives on our backlog. So that's what we're suggesting here. So up the top line, we've got 3 things. So how valuable is this relative to our other features? How urgent is it? And that's going to change over time. And how much of an opportunity or a risk is this for us? So what we do is we put story points on each of those and we divide it by job size. Job size really affects the results, so the idea is to try and keep that as small as possible. So in real life, this is what it looks like. So I suggest you go back and try and doing it with your features. Don't do it with stories, but do it with features or epics. And what we very quickly do here is we start identifying the things that we should work on. So our high value, low effort items rather than low effort, high value. And we stop making decisions about everything else down the backlog. So we're focusing our efforts just on the ones we're more likely to do up front. So once again, we're simplifying our processes there as well. So what does this look in real life once we've done this? Something like this. Who's heard of big room planning or program increment planning or anything like that? Cool, okay. So I really hope you start doing this in your companies. This is where we start going from team level Agile up to scaled Agile. And we're getting everyone in the room making decisions about the medium term of what we're working on. So the next 12 weeks or so. So in this particular example, we had about 500 people together for 2 days. We have the business kicking off, the vision. Imagine that, business people talking to developers all in the same room, asking questions of each other, making decisions. And at the end of it, we've got the next 12 weeks planned, the features and stories that our teams are going to deliver. So how many decisions does this give us? Well, the example that I'm talking about, I conservatively estimated on the back of a napkin, and you can do it yourself to check. Our 500 people made at least 20,000 decisions on their flagship product in 2 days. So just think about that. If you're working in a traditional way where you're not getting your people together face-to-face like this, how long would it take you to make that number of decisions on your flagship product? And once these guys had worked together for 2 days, what did they do next? They just got on with it because they had done the planning, they had done the team confidence vote, they were happy, they just got on with it. We can put this into a tool as well, which helps us make decisions as well. So here we've got a portfolio level tool. Down the side, we've got our features. So based on previous performance, we can see the blue line of where we're going to get to this release. So all of a sudden, we're only making decisions about the features around there that may or may not make it in. Everything else is a given. It's either going to be in or we're not going to get to it. So let's focus our decisions around the features that matter. We can also see there how full our teams are and make decisions about what features we push in. Okay, and wherever possible, let's get rid of our decisions altogether. Do we need to make the decisions? So Obama wears 2 coloured suits. What colour suits does he wear? Blue and grey, okay? He actually wore a tan suit one day and it made the front page of the news. And this is why he says, and Mark Zuckerberg is the same, I don't want to make decisions about what I eat or what I wear because it takes brain power. I just want to get on with making the important decisions. So what does that mean in terms of agile and lean and innovation? It means we need to push down our decisions. So wherever possible, we need to decentralize. There are a few extra costs for doing that. But if we need frequent decisions, if we need time-critical decisions and decisions with local input, we get better results wherever we decentralize. So that means our senior people giving up a little bit of power and empowering the teams. But the overall result is we get more through our system and we get better decisions made and more empowered people. And what happens when we do that? If we start to reduce the number of decisions and standardize the way that we work, we start freeing our time up for the fun stuff, so for innovation. So even if we were only able to save 4 hours a week, that adds up to 6 weeks per year of time for innovation, all supported by good decision making. That's the equivalent of an additional full-time equivalent in your Scrum team. It also means if you've got a development budget of $10 million, you're giving yourself an extra $1 million, which you can start to use for innovation for your customers. Okay, so in terms of going back to your own organizations, use the LEAN acronym that I shared with you before and start trying to reduce the cost of delay. So how do we minimize decisions and get more decisions through our framework? Okay, so finally, going on to our people. We've talked a bit about Lean and Agile supporting the process for decisions, but what about our people? I was really glad yesterday that one of the keynotes talked about diversity in teams. So I see it more and more. It's a bit of a hot topic. And when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about putting one person of a different gender or one person from a different country in our teams and ticking the diversity box. What we're looking for is cognitively diverse teams. So people from different backgrounds, different ages, different ethnicities, different experiences, etc. Because cognitively diverse teams have been shown over and over again both to make better decisions and also to reduce errors. And one of the reasons why is we make fewer assumptions. So when we're in a homogeneous group, we tend to think we know what the other person is thinking. When we're in a diverse group, we ask more questions. And I find that myself. So for 18 of my 20 years in the workplace, I've worked with foreign groups. So whether it be different cultural groups in New Zealand or being overseas. And I'm always the one who has to check and say, what did you really mean by that? Because even in Australia, sometimes they speak a foreign language, okay? And I just don't understand what they mean. So I have to check a lot more about what we're actually meaning. There are a lot fewer assumptions made. And cognitively diverse teams often come up with solutions where you think, I wouldn't have thought of that myself. Okay, someone has out-of-the-box thinking. So while ability still trumps diversity, it's not an either-or. We can have both. And research has backed up these 3 principles of effective teams and cognitively diverse teams. So what are the benefits we get out of that? Is we have teams with better communication. So rather than having assumptions all the time, we're actually learning to communicate better. We have equal participation when we've got that diversity happening, and that leads to higher performing teams and more innovation. And we're not famous for the last one in IT, but highly effective teams are better at reading each other emotionally as well. And that's hard when you're trapped behind a screen or if you're in a different location, okay? No substitute for face-to-face. So what do they say? Something like 70% of communication is nonverbal. And once our teams are smart, that can help us lead to more innovation as well. So all this stuff is backed up by Scrum and Lean. So where we've got our smart teams working effectively, we've got our decision-making frameworks in progress, in play, we start to hear everyone heard. People feel safe to propose new ideas, and that's where our innovation happens. We've delegated our decisions down to the team level wherever possible, so they are empowered to make the best decisions they can. And it's a team game, so credit is shared amongst the team, and that goes both ways. And finally, feedback, a two-way street. So not only is our team on board about giving feedback and getting feedback, it goes up and down the organisation, and that feedback is actually implemented. It doesn't just go to an empty box. Cool. So what can we do when we go back to our organisations? Well, firstly, we can build long-lived cross-functional teams around both ability and diversity. So think about how the new person in your team will add to the group's ability as a whole to make decisions. Why do we want to do that? So that we improve the quality of our decisions and also our innovation. And what sort of metric can we use? Again, look at lead time and work in progress. So are we reducing our lead time and our work in progress? Okay, so we're winding up to the end. Just a couple of references. I like to try and make my books as interesting as possible. So if you're interested in high-performing teams, reducing decisions, all this stuff, this is a book about the British cycling team. So they had a goal in 2010 to, I might get my facts slightly wrong, they had a goal in 2010 to win a Tour de France in the next 5 years. They've now won 4 out of 6 in a row after not winning a Tour de France for 99 years. Okay? A lot of it is just through organisation and simplifying and standardising. These guys are OCD, or CDO with the letters in the correct order, okay, as I like to say. Great, and if you don't like reading, it's a good book as well. So it's very sports-based, very practical. There's no business jargon. Has anyone seen this movie? It's been out quite recently. Really frustrating, okay? In terms of decision-making, this is a high suspense movie, but if you're interested in decision-making or just a good suspense film, it's all about how humans just aren't very good at actually making decisions sometimes and how they tend to procrastinate. Okay, finally, I like to get feedback on the group on whether you found the session valuable. So we do a thing in CA Rally called Fist of 5. Okay, it's not as bad as it sounds. So what we get to everyone to do is hold up their fist, and if you thought that it was a waste of time today, it was a 1. If you didn't really enjoy it, a 2. If it was kind of okay, then a 3. If you enjoyed it, 4, and if it was tops, then we give it a 5. So let's go. How did we go? Cool. Great. Okay, thank you very much.